All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith. I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thank you so much for joining me today for Excel Part 3. To start out, let me go ahead and again, just share that link with you for the handout and example file. That way you can follow along if you feel so inclined. We are again streaming to YouTube and Facebook, so if you want to circle back and follow along later on, feel free. And hopefully that will, so yeah, definitely check those out and feel free to follow along or just watch whatever is most helpful and comfortable for you. Obviously, a couple of just regular preliminary things to get out of the way. As always, if you have any questions at any point, please speak up and let me know. Don't worry about whether it's a really solid, unusual question or any of those kinds of things. The point of a technology class is for you to learn useful things about technology. So if you're learning useful things about technology, then great, things are going well, even if we are even if there are a few little rabbit trails in order to answer questions, stuff like that. So don't feel, don't feel like you have to have a question that's just spot on or anything like that. Even if it seems like, oh, this might be really obvious, just ask the question. I'll be happy to respond to that. I want to make sure that you you come away having learned a lot today, and an important part of that is folks being able to ask questions when they have them. So please speak up with those questions. When you have questions, the way to get those to me is down at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're on a computer, you should see a little speech bubble that says chat right underneath it. Click on that speech bubble, type in your question, press enter or on your keyboard if you're on a PC, or return if you're on a Mac, and I will see that. If you're on a mobile device, tap the middle of the screen in your Zoom app, look in the corner of the screen and find the More button, tap on that, and a little menu should pop up. Tap chat in that menu and you should see it there. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube right now, you can also ask questions. All you'll need to do is on Facebook, take a look in the comments section and just add your question as a comment like you would on any other post. And if you are on YouTube, then look just to my right and you should see the live chat box over there. You can type it in and press enter to send me your questions that way. I should see all of that stuff. So, well, wherever you are, ask your questions when you have them and we will make sure they get addressed. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. So let's see. Oh, right. Also, if there are technical difficulties, let me know about that too. All right, so here, let me go ahead and fire up the screen share and we will dive into Excel. All right, so I've got my part 3 example file opened up here. When you first download it from the internet, you might see something like this, this protected view, because it's a file that's downloaded from the internet. If you see that, just click enable editing. I promise I didn't put any viruses in there at all. You're good. So, all right, we've got our part 3 example file open, and let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So today's class, part 3, is color coding, logic, and more. If you weren't able to make it to either part 1 or part 2, if you're familiar with kind of intermediate Excel, you should still be fine right now. So stick with me if that's you. I definitely think you'll still get plenty out of this. And of course, if at any point you need to go back and watch parts 1 and 2, there are versions of them. Now, part 1, we had some technical difficulties with the stream, but there is a previous version of part 1, or maybe even a couple of them, available on the CALS YouTube channel. If you type cals.link/YouTube into your web browser, that'll take you straight there. And in fact, there's a little playlist that's called Microsoft Excel course. So feel free to check that out and catch up on those previous sessions. This session today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a few things. First of all, we're going to start with what are called logical functions, including the if function. So we'll do a little refresher on terminology. So if you're like, wait, what were functions again? I've slept since last week. No worries. We'll tackle that. So no need to fear. We've got so we're going to talk about what we call logical functions, which basically help us add sort of an interactivity to our functions, or to our formulas, or at least make them more useful in more situations. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about also how logical functions can make your sheets look a little more clean and organized, and that's always nice. Next, we'll talk about something called data validation, which basically allows you to have information that's typed into a cell in your workbook, to have Excel check it over and make sure it's actually the kind of information that's needed in that cell. And that can be just really, really handy. We'll also talk about how to remove duplicate entries in your sheets, because goodness knows that can happen a lot of times. We'll talk about protecting parts of a workbook so that you can make sure that unauthorized or unintentional changes don't happen. And finally, we'll talk about what's called conditional formatting, which allows you to do color coding and a lot of other handy things. So here we go. Let's get rolling. Okay, so just a little refresher, just briefly before we dive into more examples and kind of the meat of this session. So we talked about last week and the week before ranges of cells. When I say a range of cells, what I'm referring to again is just a group of cells that are together with no gaps in between. So a range of cells is either going to be a rectangle like this. So this is the range E2 to I13. And if I type that into a formula, it's going to be E2 colon, not semicolon. So you'll have to hold shift while you're pressing the key. So E2 colon, what was it? G13 or whatever the bottom right cell was that I just selected. So that is a range of cells. This is also a range of cells. So basically just a line of cells that runs vertically, or a line of cells that runs horizontally. But either way, the way that you write it in a formula is you write the name or address of the top left cell, a colon, and then the name or address of the bottom right cell in your formula or in your range. So that's a range of cells. When we talk about a range, that's what we're talking about. Formulas, again, are kind of the power tools of Excel. If you need Excel to calculate something or figure something out, a formula is how you do it. Every formula starts with the equal sign. So equal sign and then something after that. If you start with an equal sign, but whatever you typed in the cell is not supposed to be a formula, Excel is going to be confused, and it's going to try to figure it out as a formula, and that could cause a problem. So so always start a formula with an equal sign. Never start anything else with an equal sign. That's how that works. And then what happens afterward is basically just the information or essentially the process that you want Excel to follow and the information that you want it to use to do what it's supposed to do. So that's a formula. The building blocks of formulas in Excel, or at least a major building block of formulas in Excel, is called a function. So last time we worked on, or last time we did a lot, particularly at the beginning of the class, with the sum function, which is a very easy example. The sum function is the word sum, S-U-M, as in the answer to an addition problem, followed by a set of parentheses, a left parenthesis, and then a right parenthesis. And inside those parentheses, you have, in the case of the sum function, a number or a group of numbers that you want it to add together. So in this case, with this formula, it's here in cell C14, we have the sum of C2 to C13. So that's all of these numbers in this column here. The things inside of the formula, or inside of the parentheses that go with the function, the information that you want it to act on, is known as arguments. Each argument is separated from the other arguments by a comma. And we'll have plenty of practice with that this week. So don't worry about it if you're like, oh, again, I've slept since then. Finally, last sort of bit of terminology here is a sheet. So our Excel files, if you want to be a little more technical about it, and believe me, Microsoft does. And a lot of people who know a lot about Excel really do want to be technical. And so an Excel file technically is not a spreadsheet, it's a workbook. The reason that it's called a workbook rather than a spreadsheet is that the workbook can contain multiple sheets, just like a book can contain multiple, pieces of paper with different pieces of information on it. So an Excel file is known as a workbook, and we have our part 3 example workbook open right now. I've got that in front of me. There are several sheets inside this workbook. So there's the members sheet, data validation, duplicates, protecting, conditional formatting 1, conditional formatting 2. And then there's a little ... which tells me there are more. I can click on that to see. Okay, it's just the end of conditional formatting 2. So I can use those dots to scroll over, or I can use these arrow buttons right here in the bottom corner to scroll around and make sure that I am, and make sure I can see the sheet that I want. So we're going to start out and just work our way from left to right, like we did last week to a certain extent. So all that said, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about and get into the meat of things. Hopefully you've had a good, you now feel refreshed and back in the groove a little bit. So let's talk about this first example here. What we're doing here, as I mentioned at the beginning of class, is we're working with what we call logical functions. A logical function, well, as you might imagine by the name, uses logic to figure out the answer to a problem. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this in this particular little example. Let's say we've got a little contest going between Jack and Diane. They've scored various amounts of points each month over the course of a whole year. And here are their totals, 634 to 675. What we want to do is we want to have these totals compared. We want our spreadsheet to officially declare a winner here. We're going to use a formula to do that, of course. I mean, obviously, you can look at these totals and see who the winner is right now, but we want to have a formula that does it, because depending on the situation, it might not be quite as obvious as this. So in order to do that, we are going to use a couple of logical functions. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click in this cell, C15, next to where it says winner. And I'm going to click up here in the formula bar at the top. Again, you don't have to do that in order to type a formula in Excel, but it helps make it a little bit easier to, typing in the formula bar rather than in the cell itself helps make it a little bit easier to correct problems if you, when you make mistakes. So I've clicked in the formula bar. I'm going to hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word if. IF, just regular old if. Then I'm going to open a set of parentheses. So I'll hold Shift while pressing 9 on my keyboard. And then once I've opened the set of parentheses, it's giving me the little hint system down here again. The if function calls for 3 arguments, 3 bits of information to work with. The first argument here is logical test. The logical test argument is basically some statement that you tell Excel, and Excel is going to figure out whether that's true or false. So in this case, the statement that we're going to give Excel is B14 is greater than C14. And the greater than sign, at least on my keyboard, I'm not 100% sure about a Mac because I don't have one in front of me, but the greater than sign shares a key with the period. So you'll hold down the Shift key while pressing period on your keyboard. So B14 is greater than C14. Then I'll put a comma because that's my first argument right there, that logical test, B14 is greater than C14. Then we have our value if true. So the value if true, Excel is going to look at this statement right here. And technically, this is kind of also a function, this comparison here of using the greater than sign. So it's B14 is greater than C14. And in fact, if I did something like this, I think, I'm not 100%, well, let's not go there. But I think it would give you some result if you just put equal sign B14 is greater than C14. But we won't go there right now because we're in the middle of writing a formula. So we've got our logical test, our statement. Hey, Excel, B14 is greater than C14. Excel's going to look at B14 and it's going to look at C14 and it's going to compare them. And it's going to say, is that a true statement or is that a false statement? If it's a true statement, then we're going to use this value if true. And this can be some other calculation you'd like it to make, or it can just be a value of some sort. In this case, it is just going to be a value. So what I'm going to do is use some quotation marks. So I'm going to add quotation mark, and I'm going to type Jack, and I'll add an exclamation point just for enthusiasm. It's not required. And then I'll add another quotation mark. So we've got the word Jack inside of quotation marks right here. Then I'm going to put a comma. And that brings us to the last argument that we need inside of our parentheses, which is the value if false. The value if false is going to be Diane, again in quotation marks. So I'll put Diane exclamation point and close the quotation mark. So again, just like with the parentheses, you need, if you have one quotation mark, you've got to have another one. And so make sure that you wrap both of those names in quotation marks. And again, the exclamation point is just to make it a little more exciting. It's not anything that's required for the formula to work. Then I'm going to add, my right parenthesis, because as I just mentioned, if you have a left parenthesis, you got to have a right one. So now there I am. There's my formula. I'm going to press enter on my keyboard or click this little check mark up here next to the formula bar. And I get Diane. Woohoo. All right. Diane's the winner. And when I look at my values up here, yes, that's right. 634 is less than 675. So Diane is indeed the winner. So again, let's just go through what this formula does really quickly, just so that that's very clear. We're making a statement. So we've got our equal sign, we've got our if function. Inside of the if function, first we're making a statement. We're saying, hey, Excel, B14 is greater than C14, or the value inside of this cell is bigger than the value inside of this cell. Excel looks at it and says, is that true or is that false? Turns out it's false because the value in C14 is actually greater than the value in B14. And so Excel skips over this part that says value if true and goes straight to the value if false and fills Diane's name in here. When we put these names in quotation marks here, what this is telling Excel is this is text information here. In the sort of computer programming world, we call this a string of text. So we're giving Excel a string of text, a piece of text to work with. And if there's anything inside of these quotation marks, Excel is just going to treat this as text. It's not going to treat it as any sort of special characters that have special meanings inside of a formula, like the equal sign or the exclamation point, actually. So this is just saying we want this text to appear in the cell. So when I do that, there we go. We've got it. Diane is the winner. But there is actually a problem with this formula. It's not fully working the way that it should. And I'm going to show you what I mean. So let's say that I come down here and I remove the formula. Or actually, let's see. Let's say that I get, so there's a 41-point difference between these two. I'm just going to go ahead and double this 41 and make it 82. And now we have 675 and 675. It's a tie, but turns out our spreadsheet still thinks Diane's the winner. If you look at this formula, you can see why. We've got B14 is greater than C14. And Excel is looking to figure out whether that statement is true or false. And it turns out the statement is false, not because Diane was the winner here, but because this is a false statement. B14 is not greater than C14. They're the same. So what we need to do to make this formula work the way that we as humans would expect it to is we need to add a little bit more functionality to this formula. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make sure I have C15 selected again. I'm going to come right back up here to the formula bar, and I'm going to click between this equal sign and the I in if. And I'm going to add a few spaces here just to make it easier to see what I'm doing in the next little bit. Then I'm going to just use my left arrow key, come on down next to the equal sign again, and I'm going to add another if. So I'll type if again, open another set of parentheses. When I add that left parenthesis, by the way, you'll notice this parenthesis and this parenthesis both turn red because that's now a set of sort of inner parentheses. And so we want to make sure that that is we want to make sure that that is red, that way, when it's color coded like this, you can make sure that every set of parentheses is closed the way that you would expect it to. So here we go. What I'm going to do inside of this, or now that I've got the if function opened up here, we need a new logical test. What we're going to do is write one that checks for a tie. So I'm going to say B14 equals sign C14. That's my new logical test at the beginning here. I'll put a comma, and then we're prompted for a value if true. The value if true is going to be, well, if B14 is equal to C14, in other words, these are the same, we're going to have a tie. So in quotation marks, I'm going to write tie. There we go. And then after the quotation marks are closed out, I'm going to put a comma. And now we're being prompted for our value if false. So what we've done so far is we've given Excel a statement and said, and Excel is going to work from left to right at least in the majority of cases. So, so Excel starts with this, starts with the if function here. If B14 is equal to, or if, and then B14 is equal to C14. So we've given it that statement. We're saying these two cells have the same value. And Excel looks and turns out right now they do. So it uses the value if true, and that's tie. So it's just going to fill in the word tie here right now. But our value if false, what we need to do then, if we've checked for a tie and it's not a tie, then what we need to do is we need to check to see who's the winner. So we can do that with essentially our existing formula. So all I'm going to do now is on the other side of this comma here for value if false, I'm just going to delete those commas that I added in initially. And then I'm going to come over here to the very end of the formula, hold Shift, press 0 to close out my leftmost set of parentheses here. So now we have two sets of parentheses, one inside the other. The first if function is going to check for a tie. But then if it's not a tie, this if function is going to kick in and it's going to see who the winner is. Now, we still have our kind of broken formula in the middle here, but it's going to work because we've already eliminated the possibility of a tie. There are really only three options here. Either B14 is equal to C14, and so it's a tie. If we eliminate that one, then the only possibility is either Jack's the winner or Diane's the winner. And so we've accounted for all three possibilities. That's one thing you want to do when you're coming up with your own formulas, is to just think about what the different possibilities are of scenarios that your formula might need to account for. If the spreadsheet, if the spreadsheet that it's on is empty, if it's got more data than maybe you expect, if you have to change some, if you have to add data later on, if you have negative numbers or whatever the case may be. Now, in some scenarios, you probably won't get negative numbers and whatever, but the main point of it is you just want to make sure that you are thinking through the scenarios that could reasonably come up and kind of writing your formulas that way. And again, in computer programming world, what we call this is coding defensively. So you've heard of driving defensively. This is coding defensively, basically thinking about what could go wrong beforehand and trying to account for that. And by the way, I keep referring back to computer programming because this is actually a kind of a form of computer programming. So congratulations, you're a coder now. And so just know that. Okay. Oh, and by the way, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about writing code, next month, I am going to be offering my Hello World series of classes, which is an introductory programming class. You don't have to have any experience with code before whatsoever. You don't have to have any special expensive software. Everything that we're going to be using is going to be free and available on the web. And so if that piques your interest, come on, it's really fun, actually. Okay, anyway, we've written our formula. I'm going to hit the little check mark here. And sure enough, tie. If I change this back to 41 like it was before, Diane's declared the winner. If I go ahead and remove this 85 and make that 0, then Jack's declared the winner. So our formula is working properly. We've done it. Hooray. All right, so let's move on to this sheet that's labeled members here. When I click on that, you'll notice I've got, so I have a list here of some fake people who are part of a fake club that I'm keeping the membership roles of. So the folks in this club, if I, when I look, or I've got, whoops, right clicked accidentally there. I've got everybody listed out, and I have, what I have here, I've got, I actually have these two columns. One is the full name column, and one is a full address column. And then over here, I have a title, a first name, a last name. And then I have a street address, a city, a state or province, a zip code, country, and a phone number. The phone number we don't really use. In fact, the country we also don't really use. But over here in columns A and B, you'll notice we are using something that's, we are actually doing something with most of this information. We've got a new function here, which I'm not going to spend a ton of time on. Honestly, even though it's got an intimidating name, it's kind of easy. And that's the concatenate function. Concatenate is your $5 computer science word for today. And what it means is taking some text and putting it next to some other text. That's all it is. And so the concatenate function, as you might imagine, takes some text and puts it next to some other text. And so in this case, what we've got is, well, let me click on it and the color coding will make it a little easier to see what's going on with this formula. So here in cell A2, I have equal sign and then the word concatenate, C-O-N-C-A-T-E-N-A-T-E. By the way, in I believe 2016, certainly 2019 Excel and onward, the concatenate function, although it still works if you type it into your spreadsheet, and I used it to make it backwards compatible with old versions of Excel. The concatenate function does the concatenate function is replaced in some of those newer versions by a shortened name for it, which is just concat, like this. So it's the same thing, you just don't have to type out the whole word. Cool. Okay. So I have the concatenate function here. I've got my parentheses because every function in Excel has to have a set of parentheses, even if there's nothing inside it. In this formula, we actually have 5 arguments for the concatenate function. So the first one is C2, and that's the cell in which we find Mr. right here. After that, there's a comma. And then after the comma is our second argument. You can see text2 is in bold here. And the second argument is inside of quotation marks, period, space. That's all it is. Just inside of quotation marks, I have a period and then a space. And then I close the quotation marks. Then I have another comma. My third argument is D2, color coded here in red. And that's where you find prior, which is this person's first name. Then back up in the formula, there's another comma. So we know this is moving into the fourth argument. The fourth argument is just a space in between 2 quotation marks. So just a space, nothing else. And then finally, our fifth argument, text 5 down here, after the last comma, is E2, where we have Mayat, which is this fake person's last name. And when we put them all together, Mr. period space, prior space, Mayat, then we get over here in A2, Mr. prior Mayat with the period after the Mr. So that's correctly punctuated. But it's not over here. It's just MR and nothing. And you can see on each line, I have a similar formula that I just auto-filled down like I showed you last week. And because I might be adding more people eventually to this club, I've got some additional lines where the formula shows up, but there's no data for it to work with. So you'll notice here on row 9, I've got C9 space or period space, D9 space, E9, but nothing's in those cells. If I add something in those cells, then it actually works. But if there's nothing in those cells, then what it's doing is it's giving me this stray period right here. And I have a similar formula in column B that is even worse. Down here, you'll notice I put a semicolon between the street address and the name of the city. And then there's a comma between the city and the state or province. Up here, I just have a semicolon and a space on each, or a semicolon and a comma on each of these lines. So the formula is working, but I kind of don't want it to be working on these cells. But of course, if I don't put something there, then later on when I go to fill this in, then I've got to copy the formula down onto the next row. And that's kind of a hassle. I just want to do that once and be done with it. So what I want to do is I want to rewrite, we're not going to deal with the formula in column B2. That is a great thing for you to practice with if you're interested. But here in A2, we've got our, but here in A2, I want to rewrite this formula so that the autofill versions of it down here on the rest of the rows, if there's something in columns C, D, and E, they will work. If there's nothing in columns C, D, and E, they will just show a blank cell. So let's do it. Here in cell A2, I've got my, I'm going to click between the equal sign and the C in the word concatenate there, and I'm going to add a few spaces just to make it easier to see what I'm writing in the rest of the formula. Then I'm going to head over next to my equal sign, and I'm going to use the if function once again. This time, so I'm going to add my parenthesis. This time, what I'm going to do is inside of the if function, I'm going to use another new function, which is or. Exactly what it sounds like, just OR. And then I'll open a set of parentheses for that function as well, the OR function. Inside of the OR function, so what the OR function does is it checks multiple logical tests at once. We had the B14 is greater than C14 logical test on the previous sheet. But if we wanted to check multiple places and get an answer, the OR function can do that. Basically, well, let me show you what I mean, and then we'll elaborate a little bit. So inside of the OR function, we're going to go C2 equal sign, and then 2 quotation marks with nothing in between, not even a space, just quotation mark, quotation mark. I'll put a comma, D2 equal sign, quotation mark, quotation mark. Wonderful. I'll put a comma after that. And finally, E2 equal sign, quotation mark, quotation mark. So those are 3 logical tests, 3 statements that we're making to Excel where we need Excel to look into it and see whether that's true or false. And what those statements mean, C2 equals quotation mark, is C2 is a blank cell. When we're writing a formula, 2 quotation marks just means a blank cell, or it means nothing, basically. Not just 0, but actually nothing whatsoever. So we have these 3 logical tests. Those are the 3 arguments inside the OR function, so they're separated by commas. I'm going to close the parentheses with the OR function. What the OR function is going to do is it's going to check to see whether C2, D2, or E2 is blank. If any of them are, then basically it comes back and says, oh, that's true. If any of them are blank, this comes back as true because you're giving it 3 possibilities and any of those can be correct. Either C2 equals a blank cell, or D2 equals a blank cell, or E2 equals a blank cell. That's really what you're saying with this OR function in these arguments here. So the OR function, if any of these is blank, it's going to come back as true, or evaluate as true if you want to get all computer sciencey again. Conversely, if all of these have something in them, then it will come back or evaluate as false. And so now we need to find out what's our value if true and our value if false. So our value if true, in other words, if any of these cells is blank, I'm going to put a comma, and then that argument, the value if true, is going to be equal sign, or excuse me, quotation mark, quotation mark. So a blank cell again. That's our value if true. And then after that, I'm going to put a comma. And then our value if false is going to be exactly the same formula that we had before. Concatenate, and then C2 period space, D2 periods or space, and then E2. Finally, of course, I have an open set of parentheses here for the if function. I need to close that up. So I'm going to click at the end of my formula, hold shift, press 0, close up those parentheses, hit the check mark. And this looks exactly the same. But if we autofill down or flash fill like we did last week, so I just leave this cell selected, look for the little green dot down here at the bottom, and double click on it with my mouse. Then it autofills all of these cells with a similar formula that's just adjusted based on the row that it's on. So now you can see here in cell A9, there's no stray period like we had before. And of course, A9 is looking at C9, D9, E9. And if there's something there, it will concatenate or put them together. If I do, or if I fill in something in those cells, then again, as long as all three of these cells have something in them, then it's going to, the formula is going to work. If I don't have a title or a first name or a last name, none of it's going to work. And there's other ways you could write the formula where it would check to see if any of these were had something in them and work if any of those were working. But that's a little more complicated. And unfortunately, we don't have time to cover that. Okay, someone says, wait, mine says false. Okay, that was a couple minutes ago. If you got rid of the ending of the formula, that might be what's happening, or it might, if you didn't close it up, if you didn't close the parentheses, maybe. Honestly, you might copy and paste your exact formula. If you go up here in the formula bar, click in the formula bar, select that, and then copy, you can paste it into the chat, and I'll be able to look at it. That might give us the best clue. But if I went, well, for example, let's go C2 equal sign blank cell, D2 equal sign blank cell, E2 equal sign blank cell, close those parentheses. Yeah, that is going to give me false. Oh, okay. All right. Oh, left out a set of quotes. Yes, that will do it, because if you don't close one of those sets of quotation marks, then Excel thinks that the rest of the entire formula is part of the string of text, and so it's not gonna work with it as though it's a formula. But yeah, that's what this. Most of these logical functions, or any of these things that do like a comparison. Let's try that out. If I go, let's see, equal sign 5 less than 2. Yeah. Any of those comparisons like that, where it's checking, like where it has a logical test, Excel will still kind of do the calculation and compare those values. So when I have equal sign 5 is less than 2, then it gives me false as the result here. Same down here, if I use the or to check whether all these cells are empty, then it gives me false, because those cells have text in them. Cool. What questions does everybody have before we shift gears? Excuse me, a little bit. Good job troubleshooting, by the way. Cool. Again, if you're typing a question and I just haven't seen it yet, don't worry. Still keep typing and send it. Oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah, a refresher on how to autofill the. So you can't like flash fill the entire column like I did. I mean, if you could autofill the entire, whoops. Don't know what's happening there. Hang on. Weird. Okay. So you can't do the entire column, but what I did was I went all the way down to 201, which is where there's also a formula, or where there's previous versions of the formula. To fill that in quickly, what you'll do is select the cell with the sort of prototype formula up at the top here, and just double click on the little dot, the little green dot in the corner there. And that will, and that'll populate it all the way down until you get to row 201. Again, it's the little green dot in the bottom right corner of the selection. That's good. It's good to refresh on those things from time to time. All right. Let's go ahead and move into data validation. So data validation is pretty interesting. This is like just a very useful tool for dealing with information and keeping track of stuff, particularly over time. Like a lot of times you'll sort of come back to a workbook and update it with new information and stuff like that. And if you've got a lot of stuff to fill in there, that can get a little complicated. So we want to make sure that we are, we can use data validation to basically to make sure that that we've got the right kind of information in each type of cells, or in each column, or in each area that we need to put data in. So here I have a list of customers for another fake business, and excuse me. This time we have we've got a few empty columns here that we're going to use data validation to fill in. The first one is this customer type. So I have all these people over here, and what I want to do is I want to make it so that there are 3 different customer types that our business works with: business customers, consumer customers, and government customers. And what I want to do for this customer type is I want to fill in, I want to essentially make sure these are the only 3 options, and make sure we can't, so that we can keep accurate track of our data and stuff. I also want to make sure that we don't actually say, for instance, we don't leave off one of the S's at the end of the word business, or things like that. If you do, then it's going to make your data harder to deal with. So we want to restrict this down so that only certain things can go in these cells, and that's exactly what data validation does. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select the whole column for the sake of convenience. So I'm going to click on the C up at the top here, or some of the space nearby, and that's going to select all of these cells from C1 on down to the very bottom of the sheet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the data tab up here at the top, and I'm going to choose data that's not the right one. Data validation right here. So on mine, it's kind of a small button here. It's got these little boxes. One has a check mark and one has kind of a like no ghosts kind of mark on it. Depending on the size of your screen and depending on how you have things set up, you might see a different size button. You might see the words data validation, but I'm just going to click on the button. Or if I click on the drop-down box here, or drop-down arrow here, I can click data validation in the menu. Either way works. But I do need to have these cells selected, all the cells in column C. And I can do that just by clicking the C. Okay. Once I do that, I'll have the data validation dialog box right here. What this does is basically allow me to specify the data validation settings for these cells. So right now we have allow any value. So basically anything that you can put inside a cell, currently we can put inside of cells in column C. But if I click the drop-down menu, then rather than any value, I can go for whole number, decimal, list, date, time, text length, or custom. We'll talk about that in a moment, some of these in a moment, but for now, we're gonna go with list. Click on that. We get two little check boxes here, ignore blank and in cell dropdown. I'm gonna keep both of those checked, but depending on your situation, you may want to uncheck them. We'll talk about what those do here in a moment. And then down here, there's a little blank underneath source. I can click here and I can type something in, or what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to click this little button with the up arrow next to the blank. When I click on that, what it does is roll this data validation dialog box up like a window shade. And now I can use my mouse to come over here and select cells. So in this case, we're looking for customer type. So we want to make sure that our, so we've got a list of our customer types that are, our acceptable customer types over here in column M. I'm going to click and drag from so that I have business, consumer, and government selected here. Now make sure you don't select the cell up here in M1 that has the words customer type, because otherwise that's going to be an option in this dropdown, and we don't want that. Business, consumer, and government, these three cells, M2 to M4. Got those selected. I see the little dotted lines around it, little ants marching there. And then down here with the data validation dialog box, I can click this little button next to the blank. And again, that'll kind of roll the dialog box back out so I can see the whole thing. And I'll just click OK. When I do that, you'll notice I get a little drop-down arrow right next to cell C1 here. I don't actually want to do anything with cell C1. I'm going to leave it alone. Instead, I'm going to click in cell C2. Looking over here, this one is Mr. John Phoenix. That's probably just a consumer customer. So when I click in cell C2, you'll notice I get the drop-down arrow over next to it. I'll click on that drop-down arrow and I'll select consumer. Da-da-da, there it is. So now I have that selected here. Miss Aloha Munguia, let's say she's a consumer as well. Instead of, I can use the drop-down menu again by clicking the little arrow, or I can actually just type it in here. Press enter. Beautiful. And then down here, this is a third consumer one. But let's say I get a little sloppy here and I type consumer instead. Oops, this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. Retry. Okay, I'll get rid of this. Let's try again. Let's say I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, it's a personal customer. Nope, this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for the cell. Retry. So, oh, right, not personal consumer. So I can either type that in correctly, or I can click the drop-down arrow, which apparently tried to confirm it didn't work. That's okay. Just come back up, click the drop-down arrow again, select consumer, and we're good to go. So what this is going to do is this is going to save me some time because I don't have to type it all in there. It's also going to keep me from making mistakes, even little typos inside of the cell. And so let's see, this looks like a government customer. I'll click here and do government and so on and so forth. You can still do all the other things if I wanted to. These next three are personal, or consumer. So I'll click consumer. I could autofill this down if I want to by dragging a little dot. Great. And then, you can deal with it just like you would any other cell, except only certain types of values, only certain types of data are allowed inside the cell once data validation is in place. So I'll go ahead and select column C again. I'm going to click the data validation button again to pull that dialog box back up. Let's talk about these two checkboxes really quick. Ignore blank. So what this is going to do, if I uncheck this, then basically Excel is going to throw a bunch of errors my way. It won't be a big deal, but it'll kind of like mark these cells as there's a problem here because there's nothing in those cells. And so I don't want that. That's going to make my sheet look really cluttered. So I'm going to leave that checked. I'm also going to leave in cell dropdown checked. If I remove that, what's going to happen is I'll no longer have the dropdown list that I can click on and select the right option. I'll have to type in the right option, and I'll have to type it in perfectly every time, or I can copy and paste or autofill, but I'll have to input it using kind of the regular means rather than the drop-down menu, which is just so handy. So I'm going to leave both those checked for this particular situation. Again, there are a couple other columns that you can practice with. There's the category over here, so you can do purchase, repair, return, inquiry, or other. And there's the status of their case: contacted, processing, shipping, or complete. But data validation can do other things other than just letting you create a drop-down box to pick from a few options. It can also do sort of comparisons. So for example, let's say that let's say that I want to make sure that I don't allow any of these cells to have dates that are in the future, because if a case is opened, it has to be opened today. So I'm going to, or it would have been opened before. I'm going to click in column G here, select the whole column, just like I did before, head up to my data validation dialog box. Instead of allow any value, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on date. And then I have the option for between, not between, equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Let's go less than or equal to. And then actually, let's go with less than. And then for our end date, now we could choose a date on our sheet somewhere, or we can just type in a little formula. I'm going to go equal sign, use our today function. So today, open a set of parentheses and close it. And then I'll go +1. Now again, just to refresh your memory, whenever Excel stores dates, it stores them as a serial number counting from January 1st, 1900 to whatever the date is you're working with. And so if I say today +1, that's going to fill in today's date, and it's going to add 1 to it. So that's basically tomorrow. So the date should be less than or earlier than tomorrow. When I click OK, looking good. I don't know what's going on here. Oh, I see. Okay, so yeah, I used a formula to calculate these, so it keeps the days current. For some reason, it doesn't like the way that I did it here on these two cells, but whatever. So if I try to go, 5, 25, 20, 21, it's going to go, this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for the cell. Retry. Oh, not 525. I meant 5, 5. And that works. So data validation gives you a lot of tools for defining what exactly should be in cells or entire columns on your sheet, and that makes it incredibly useful to protect yourself from mistakes. Make sure that your data is consistent so that you can analyze it better, and just just check your work. So that's data validation. If you want to remove data validation from a particular cell or group of cells, well, I'll show you. If I want to remove it from just this cell, C2, or maybe even C1 here, then I can go up here, click on the data validation button again, and I can change from allow back to any value. If I click OK, then it's going to remove data validation from only cell C1. But if I click apply these changes to all other cells with the same settings, then it will remove it from all of column C, since I used the same settings there. Some of these other options that we have here, just really quick to touch on those. Whole number. So you can have Excel check to see whether it's a whole number. In other words, not like a decimal, not a fraction, anything like that, a straight up whole number. You can have it check to see whether it's a decimal number. And if it's not a decimal number, then it won't work. And of course, for both of those, you can set it to where you can have a maximum and minimum, or you can have an equal to or whatever. The list option we talked about. There's date, which we did. There's time, which is very similar, of course. Text length, that's the number of characters. So when I say characters, I'm talking about letters, numbers, symbols, and spaces. So you can have it count the number of letters, numbers, symbols, and spaces, and make sure that the text is not too long or not too short or just in the right range of length. And then custom. Custom's a little bit different. We definitely don't have time to get into it in class, but it's pretty cool when you have the hang of it. It allows you to write a formula that Excel is going to use to determine whether the value in that cell is acceptable or not. So it's pretty cool. All right, so I'm just going to click cancel on that and we'll move on. By the way, when you apply data validation to a cell, it doesn't work retroactively really, except for with blank cells. So something like this, where I had customer type typed in there before, if I try to change that, then data validation is going to get me. But as long as I leave it as it was beforehand, then it's just fine. So if you have a situation like this, you might need to remove data validation. If you wanted to change the name of this column, you might have to remove data validation from that. Otherwise, you should be fine. All right. Let's move on to duplicates here. So here in this example, I have a bunch of things listed out, which are, well, I'm keeping track of, I have a customer list here. I've got their email address, their name, their address, their zip code, and their phone number. What I need to do is I need to go through here and weed out any of these entries that are duplicates, because if someone placed an order, maybe they, if somebody placed an order with us more than once, maybe they re-entered their information rather than logging in as an existing customer. Maybe they dealt with two different salespeople who didn't know that, where the second person didn't know that the other one was an existing customer. And so we want to weed out those duplicates. To do that, it's actually pretty easy. First, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select the cells that I want to look at to determine whether there's duplicates. So in this case, I'm selecting all the cells from A1 down to J51. So I've got all those cells selected just by dragging. Now what I'm going to do is come up here right above this data validation button is the remove duplicates button. I'm going to click on that. And it says to delete duplicate values, select one or more columns that contain duplicates. Excuse me. So you can do this a couple of different ways. Now, when I look at, say, row 4 and row 5 here, if you look at these, you'll notice they are exactly the same. So it's the same email address, the same name, the same address, the same phone number. But you can also use this in situations where it's not all the same. So let's look for a, let's look for just for some duplicates here. Let's weed them out. So first, let's look for complete duplicates. So I'm going to go to delete duplicate values. All right, make sure you leave, if you selected cell A1, make sure you leave it, my data has headers, so that way it doesn't look for a duplicate in the column or in the column headers accidentally. And then down here, these are the columns that are being checked for duplicates. So the email address, the title, the first name, the last name, the street address, and so on and so forth. A lot of times I'll restrict this to just checking one column. So for example, an email address, there are, unless they are actually sharing the inbox, there are no two people who have the same email address. One of the points of email addresses is it has to be unique. And so if people are signing up based on their email address, then even if they have the same name, or even if they live in the same place, I could just have email selected and that would totally work with this. In fact, let's go ahead and try that. I'm going to click unselect all, and I'm just going to check the box next to email. Then I'll click OK. 20 duplicate values found and removed. 30 unique values remain. So we had 50 rows initially. We've gotten rid of 20 duplicate values. So now we're looking at only ones with at least a unique email address. And then if, let's say that we had, we had just just names and email addresses. If we had the same person, or if we had two people with the same name sign up, that could be a problem. And so checking the email address is going to be a good way to sort those out and make sure that we're not eliminating an actual separate person. But you might have to check multiple things, or you might not care if some columns are duplicates at all. So for example, I mean, we're going to have probably several of these. See, there's two different people in Louisiana right next to each other there. So for checking that column for duplicates, like particularly if we only check that column for duplicates, then even if they're different everywhere else, let's just go state, province, stave, province, interesting. If I click OK, we eliminated 30 duplicates. So there were 30 duplicated state or province names. So we've got, so that's narrowed us down a lot more. I'll hit undo to get those back. That's strange. Wonder how it got 30. Go figure. Anyway, that is remove duplicates. It's really, really handy. And because obviously sometimes you get duplicate information input if multiple people are working on the same spreadsheet, or whatever, people put their name in there more than once. All right. So any questions about data validation and removing duplicates before we move on? Cool. Again, keep typing if you're typing. All right, I'm going to click on the Protecting tab down here at the bottom, that next sheet. And on this sheet, what we're going to do is we're going to protect parts of our workbook against tampering or accidental changes. Either of those can be a problem. There doesn't have to be malice behind it for it to cause issues, of course. And so we want to protect certain parts of this. There are a bunch of different ways we can do this. I'm going to show you several of them, and they're all sort of used for different purposes. One thing we could do, for example, just to kind of make things easier, is we can hide columns or rows in our sheet. If we wanted to say hide the credit card information here, I could click. By the way, these are all fake credit card information. I could click here and drag over. I'll select these three columns, right click on them, and then click hide. And I do that. I now have a gap between D and actually I, because there's one column that was already hidden in our example sheet. If I want to reverse that, if I want to get rid of those, or if I want to unhide those columns, all I need to do is find this little gap between column D and column I, click on that, or right click on it, I should say, and click unhide. All right. One more time. Nope, why is it? Oh, there we go, okay. You got to get it, I forgot. You got to get it so that you get these the two lines with arrows pointing either direction. And that'll unhide all those columns, including the one that was hidden before, the secret column that just says you found it over and over again. Okay, how to find the hide option on a Mac. So I would think you should be able to right click or tap with 2 fingers if you're using the touchpad or the like Magic Mat probably too. But let me double check on that. So let's see. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you should just be able to right click or like I said, if you're on the trackpad, tap with 2 fingers rather than just one, which is the same thing. There might also be a button on the keyboard, but I'm not 100% on that, to be honest. And then if you're showing the hidden columns, so I'll hide this one. So I'll move my mouse over it, and you should see the mouse turn into 2 black lines, one with an arrow pointing right and one with an arrow pointing left. Right click on that, and then you click unhide. Did that work? Let me know if that didn't work. Okay, great. Oh, that was someone else. So yeah, let me know, the person who asked the question. Okay, yeah. Oh, that's weird. Sorry, that's happening or not happening. Okay, let's try another thing. Yeah, someone says they had trouble hitting just the right spot. No kidding. It's not easy, to be honest. So sometimes you might want to protect an entire sheet or protect some portions, some aspects of the sheet. You can use this to include a sheet for reference purposes, but not allow people to actually make changes to it. The way this works is you'll need to go up here at the top and find and click the Review tab. So I'll click on that, Review. And then I'm going to click on the Protect Sheet button. When I click on that, I get password to Unprotect Sheet. So I can type in a password if I want, or I can leave this, as it is. I can also give people, I can also change the exact options that people have for dealing with my protected sheet. So the default options are select locked cells and select unlocked cells. And we'll talk about this locked cell thing in just a minute. But by default, all of the cells are locked. So that's weird because you can also change the cells by default, but they're considered to be locked, and I'll show you where that setting is in a moment. If I fill in a password here, like, I don't know, I'm just going to make the password sheet. Okay, someone lost me. Okay, so we're protecting the entire sheet here. I'm going to click the Review tab up at the top. And then I'm going to click Protect Sheet. And then in this dialog box, I can put a password here if I want to. I'll just type the word sheet. It could be whatever. Absolutely sure I typed that correctly. And then I'll click OK. We'll just go with the default settings. It asks me to re-enter the password, so I'll type it in again to make sure that the password is right. Click OK. And now this sheet is protected. It doesn't look any different, but I do have, rather than a Protect Sheet button, I have an Unprotect Sheet button at the top. And if I try to click around here, well, I can click around. I can even select cells and stuff. But if I try to make changes, Oh, I forgot I tweaked this. Oh, I got to change that in the example file. So let's, here. If I try to make changes on a, in the credit card number, the CVV, or the expiration, then it's going to give me this little error message. Seller chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. To make a change, unprotect the sheet. So I need to unprotect the sheet. When I click on that, I'm going to type in my password that I just set up, click OK or press enter. And now it's unprotected and I can come in here and change this if I really need to. But if you give this to someone who doesn't have the password, they're not going to be able to make any changes to this sheet. So let's talk about protecting specific cells and not the whole sheet. If I want to protect the whole sheet, then I can, but by using that, and on the default settings, it should lock down all of these cells. But if we're not using the default settings, or let me show you this. So let's say that I want to keep the email address from being changed when the sheet is protected also. I'm going to select all of column A here just by clicking the A like I did before. Right click on one of these cells, and I'm going to click Format Cells. Then in this Format Cells area, I'm going to come around and click Protection, the Protection tab up at the top. And I have two checkboxes here, Locked and Hidden. It says locking cells or hiding formulas has no effect until you protect the worksheet. Review tab, Protect Group, Protect Sheet button. So I'm going to click Locked. When I click OK. Oh, okay, it's telling me it's a merged cell. What's going on there? Okay. Let's just select this data for now. Oh, I see. I also had a hidden, it's been a while since I've done this example here. I also have a hidden row here. I'm going to right click just above the 2 where I get, again, 2 lines with 2 arrows pointing either direction, and click Unhide, and that'll bring my secret top row in there. Now I've got to unmerge these cells. So I'm going to click in cell A1 there. On home, I'm going to click merge and center so that I get those unmerged. And now let's protect this column with the email list. So I'll select the whole column, right click on it, click Format Cells. And under Protection, I'm going to check the box that says Locked. By default, as I mentioned before, this checkbox is checked. So normally you won't have to do this unless you've made changes to these settings before. But if you have made changes to these settings before, you'll need to get in here. Or if you want to allow editing in certain parts of your workbook or in certain parts of your sheet, but not others. So in this case, by not doing this in columns B, C, D, or in columns B, C, and D, I'm going to allow changes to those columns even when my sheet is locked, so or is protected. So I'm going to leave this box checked, click OK. I'm going to come back over here to the Review tab again, click Protect Sheet. I'll put in a password, click OK, put the password in again to confirm. And now this sheet's protected. If I go in here and I try to change an email address, it tells me it's on a protected sheet. But because if I right click on this, but because these cells I didn't lock, they will be, they'll be changeable. So if I spelled this person's name wrong, I can just remove that E or whatever. All right, so there's one more way that we can protect or unprotect. So I'm going to unprotect this sheet just to square everything away. There's one more way that we can unprotect it, or that we can, actually 2 more things that we can do here. So one thing you can do is protect the workbook's structure. What this does is it allows you to protect the file so that so that people can make changes to, people can make changes any place they normally would be able to make changes, but they can't make any changes or most changes that affect an entire sheet. So hiding and unhiding the sheets, adding them, moving them, deleting them, renaming them. Oh, how do I unmerge the cells? Someone says. So click in the merged cell, go to the Home tab over here on the left and click Merge and Center, and that'll unmerge them. Let's see. So, okay, so, oh, actually, you know what? There's one other thing here before we get to protecting the workbook structure and protecting the entire file. So if I right click on a sheet, I can actually hide an entire sheet. So if I right click on the name down here and click hide, then I can hide that protecting sheet altogether. If I right click on the name of a sheet and click unhide, then I can find multiple, or then I can find the list of hidden sheets here and bring them back. So there's protecting, I'll click OK. There it is. And then I'll unhide one more hidden sheet right here, click OK. And then I get some fireworks. I did have a little pop-up thing that said I could hold control to unhide multiple sheets, but that'll probably be command on a Mac, but you can also do it one at a time. Okay, so let's protect the entire workbook structure. Basically, as I said, you won't be able to make most changes that affect an entire sheet. Hiding and unhiding the sheets, adding an extra sheet, moving a sheet like in relation to the other ones, deleting a sheet or renaming it. So what I'm going to do is come up and click on the Review tab again. This time I'm going to click Protect, or I'm going to protect Workbook here. And then I can type in a password if I want to, which will allow me to, which will keep it password protected, not just kind of, there's a value in protecting or, in adding protections to a workbook, but not necessarily like locking it down with the password. And the value is keeping you or someone else from making accidental changes that you don't want. So if you're worried that somebody's going to change something because, that somebody might not know that they should make this shouldn't make this particular type of change, or might make this particular type of change on accident, then you can protect it without a password. If you think somebody might intentionally go in and make some changes or get access to information they shouldn't, or things like that, then you probably do want to use a password. So I will opt out of the password this time. I'll make sure that the structure box is checked and I'll click OK. And now if I try to, let's go, I've got the hidden sheet. I'm going to right click on it. Hide and unhide are grayed out here. I also can't delete it. I can't rename it, and so on and so forth. So I've got a bunch of different options that are locked down now that the workbook is protected. If I click Protect Workbook again, then it's going to unshade that button. And now it's going to allow me to go in and hide it. If I had a password, of course, it would prompt me for the password. Finally, I can protect the entire file so that it can't even be opened without a password. To do that, I'm going to click the File tab, and that opens this Backstage view. I'm going to click Info right here. And then I'm going to click Protect Workbook. And then I'll click Encrypt with Password. I click on that. I just type in a password here, and it's going to confirm it for me. Once I click OK, then it's going to encrypt the contents of the files. So unless somebody has the password, they won't be able to get into the file. If you lose the password, guess what? you won't be able to get into the file. So you want to make sure you have the password somewhere, you know, for reference, just in case you forget what it is, or in case, like, you know, somebody comes along in the future and needs to get to it while you're unexpectedly out on vacation, or, you know, if you have some kind of emergency that you need to run to, things like that. So make sure that you are keeping up with that password, so that you don't lose access to your entire file. I'm going to click cancel. I'm not going to encrypt the whole thing. And I'm going to click the left arrow to go back. And we will move into our final couple of examples here. Okay, so now let's talk about conditional formatting. Conditional formatting is a really useful tool because it allows you to kind of tweak your, to kind of make your information more sort of glanceable, be able to see it, to see more quickly and easily what's going on, and be able to deal with it and triage and things like that. So let's dive in and work on this. So first of all, I want to show you color coding based on a scale. So what I'm going to do is come over here to column I. Column I is set up here. So in this example, this is the same example actually from one of the previous sheets. Oh yeah, the data validation. I've filled everything in now, and now I have I've got a little bit of additional data. I have a priority list, or I have a priority number right here. This shows me what priority from 1 to 10 each case is, and so which ones I need to emphasize working on. But I want, rather than just having a number, I actually want to color code these a little bit so that I can see at a glance which ones are the most important ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select column I here by clicking the I up at the top and at the top of the column. And then I'm going to come up, I'm going to click on the Home tab, and I'm going to click Conditional Formatting right here. And then I'm going to go to color scales right here. And I can choose a number of different color scales. But I want to pick this one right here, the red, yellow, green color scale. What this color scale is going to do is it's going to color code the most important things, or the things with the highest priority number with red, the middle priority numbers with yellow, and the low priority numbers with green. So when I click on this, sure enough, it does that to all of these cells that have a number here in column I. And if I add in, say, 4, then it's going to color code that one as well, because I've applied it to the whole column. So that's pretty easy. Let's do another one. So I've got now over here in cell K2, it says that the cases should be closed within 5 days. What I want to do this time is I want to color code the cells where a case is overdue, because I don't have a due date here. I just have the date that the case was open, but I do have the number of days that the case has been open. And so in order to highlight those so that I can make sure I get those squared away, those ones that are overdue, I'm going to use conditional formatting for that. So I'm going to click the H to select all of column H there. Come up here to the top, click on the conditional formatting button again. I'm on the Home tab if you forgot, or if you got off of it for a minute. And then I'll come down here in the menu, and I'll click on Highlight Cells Rules, and I'll click Greater Than. When I do that, I get format cells that are greater than, and I can fill in just a plain number. Or probably the better way to do this is I can fill in the cell that has that information. because maybe my, maybe the expectations will change at some point, and we'll have, and we'll need to, we'll need to close our cases faster, or we'll have a little more leeway on the deadline. What I want to do is, so if I want to do that, what I'm going to do is come up here, and rather than leave this 4.5, I'm going to just click the cell K2, which has the 5 in it. It's going to give me equal sign, $K, $2. Again, just a reminder from last week, the dollar signs make this what we call an absolute reference, which means that even if I'm using the formula elsewhere, I'm specifically pointing to the cell K2, and that's not going to change. When I click OK, now I get a red cell for each of these overdue cases, and actually red numbering as well. And then all the other ones are just plain white. Cool. So, and then of course, if I change this number, so if I say, oh, we only need, we can take 6 days to close cases now, then you'll notice the ones that are 6 and over, or 6 and under are now clear. All right, so let's try, there's one other thing here with the cell H1, you'll notice because there's no number there, Excel is a little confused. It's like, okay, there's supposed to be a number here, I'm supposed to be comparing it, but it's not working. I'm gonna click here on cell H1, the column header, and then I'm going to click conditional formatting again, go down to clear rules, and clear rules from selected cells. So that's going to clear that formatting from just cell H1, nothing else here. Okay, so let's try another way here. What I'm going to do, let's see. All right. Okay, so this time what I want to do is, so I have these customer types that I'm working with. The customer types, we've got all of the different, we've got our consumer customers, our government customers, and our business customers. And what I want to do is essentially color code the whole row, except for these columns here, in relation to which type of customer I'm working with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these columns, A through, let's say, G. Then I'm going to go up and click on the conditional formatting button. And this time I'm going to click Manage Rules. So we've got this little dialog box, the Conditional Formatting Rules Manager. And what I'm going to do is click New Rule. Okay, in this New Rule dialog box right here, what I'm going to do is I can do this a number of different ways. I've got kind of rule patterns that are similar to what we had in the drop-down box over here. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to click Use a Formula to determine which cells to format. So I can use the formula to figure out, oh, okay, well, is this going to work, or is this, or which way should this be color coded? So we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to create 3 different formulas, one for each option, unfortunately, but that's not going to take as long as it sounds like it might. So here's how this works. First, I've got the, first I'm going to change the, I'm going to set up the consumer customer type. So I'll go equal sign, whoops, just equal sign. And then if, we're using our logical functions again here. Type the word if, open a set of parentheses. $C1 equal sign, and then inside quotation marks, consumer. Now make sure you spell it exactly the way it's spelled over here, because if you don't, this formula is not going to work. All of that inside quote, or the word consumer inside quotation marks. After the quotation marks, we've got a comma, And then we just say true, comma, false, and close the parentheses. You're not going to get any of the fancy color coding or little hints and stuff like that in this box, unfortunately. You just have to type it in and just eyeball it to make sure it's correct. You should have equal sign if, open your set of parentheses, $ C1. Make sure you have the $ in front of the C, but you don't need it in front of the 1. In fact, don't put it there. Equal sign, then consumer, inside quotation marks, comma, true, comma, false, and then you close your parentheses. So here's what this formula does. In this case, it looks at cell C1, well, which it's not really going to work for C1, but it's not going to do anything bad to it because it's there. I wrote it for C1, but it's gonna change only this row number to be the correct row number for the subsequent rows. So, and that's why we have the $ here, so that it only changes the row number, not the column letter. So that the column letter is absolute, the row number is dependent on which row we're working in. So let's look at C2. This is going to be C2 on the next row. So it's going to look at C2 and see if it says consumer. If it does, then this formula is true. If it doesn't, then this formula is going to be false. And now we just need to tell Excel, what should you do to the cell when the formula, or, if turns out consumer is what's in that cell. I'm going to click Format. And then all I'm really going to do is just change the fill color. Let's change it to, I don't know, light green. I'll click OK. And there we have it. Now I'll click OK one more time on the new formatting rule. And there we have our first rule there. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click Apply to test it out. So I'll click Apply. And sure enough, if I look down the rows, each row that says consumer in cell in column C is also color coded in green. So let's, what I'm going to do now, let's go in. I'm going to click on this rule, click Edit Rule, and then I'm just going to select this and copy it. Click OK without making any changes. And that way we can just reuse this formula. I'm going to do new rule again, use a formula to determine which cells to format. I'll click in this box and then paste the old formula in. But rather than consumer, I'm going to go in here and change it to government. I'll click Format again. And this time, let's say that'll be light blue. I'll click OK. Make sure everything else looks fine. Click OK again. And then I'll click Apply once more. And this time, there we go. All the government rows got filled in with blue. One more time, I'm going to click New Rule. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. I'm going to click in the blank here, right click and click Paste. And then again, instead of consumer, I'm going to put business. I'll format, and this time we'll do light orange. I'll click OK. Click OK one more time, and then click Apply to see if that worked. And sure enough, the remaining cells with data in them are shaded in. So now I have all of my, I have all my rows color coded, and I can tell at a glance which ones are consumer, which ones are business, and which ones are government. So we'll do one last example here. I know we're running a little long. If you need to dash, I totally understand. Sorry about that. But I'll show you one last example of a way that you can approach this. So what we're going to do, I'm going to move to the Conditional Formatting 2 sheet. And for the Conditional Formatting 2 sheet, we've got our same set of sales data that we had back in the charts example last week. Well, what we want to do this time is basically we want to see how our salespeople are doing on their numbers, whether they're improving or kind of going downhill, from quarter to quarter. So here we go. Let's do this thing. What I'm going to do is I'll find I'm going to head to my, let's see. All right. I'm going to select all of my columns C through I. Now I'm not going to select B because B is basically our starting point. So we're color coding them to make sure or to see what happened in the previous quarter, but we don't have the previous quarter's numbers here. So we're either going to have to put that in manually or just leave it as it is. So I'm going to select all those columns C through I. Then what I'm going to do is go back and basically try the same process again, but we're going to do a slightly different type of formula. So I'm going to click Conditional Formatting, Manage Rules, and then I'm going to click New Rule. Use a formula to determine which cells to format, of course. And now this time under Format Values where this formula is true, we're going to go equal sign, do if again. And this time we're going C1 is less than B1, comma, true, comma, false. Close my parentheses. And we're going to make, and this is going to be, so C1 is less than B1. So that means our later, our kind of later numbers are less than our earlier numbers is what we're looking at there. So instead of, we want to color code that with like red. Okay, there we go. All right. So we'll color code a cell red if their numbers went down in the subsequent quarter. I'll click OK. Click Apply to double check it. And now, sure enough, Falana had 796 in Q1 of year one, and she had 775, slight dip, but still a dip in quarter two of year one. So that's working. Let's go ahead and do the opposite rule. If we are working on, if they've gone up, then let's color code them in green. So I'll click New Rule once again, use a formula to determine which cells to format. And, oh, I should have copied the other one. Let me grab that. Select this, copy it. New rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format. Paste this in, and then we'll make it greater than. If C1 is greater than B1, and then we'll go green. Click OK once again, click Apply, and now there we have it. Now again, we've got our column headings highlighted because it's confused about what the rule is supposed to do. I'll select those cells and click Clear Rules from Selected Cells. And there we have our numbers. We probably want to do a slightly less intense shade of these colors to make this a little more readable, but for now it'll work okay. One other quick thing to mention about this, in this Manage Rules area, Excel works from top to bottom. So whichever rule you have on top, that rule is gonna run first, and then the next rule is gonna run after that, and then the next rule is gonna run after that. If you want Excel to check for something and then go, this is not gonna be, or if you want Excel to check for something, and if it finds it, stop, then you have this checkbox that says stop if true. And so once you get there, and so that will allow you to kind of set it up exactly the way you want it to be. I guess also I just want to emphasize really quick the principle that's behind this. What's happening here is whatever formula you put in this blank, if the formula gives the result of true, then you're going to have, then the formatting rule is going to apply. So in this case, if it's true that C2 is greater than B2, then we typed true in here, which gives us true as a word like this in Excel is kind of special. Again, to do a little computer science on you, true in this sense is what we call a Boolean value. So it's actually a specific value, not just the word true. It's actually like the quality of truth, you might say, in a way. So if we put true like this in here, then Excel sees that as the value true, not just the word true. And so if it turns out that C2 is greater than B2, then we use the value of true, and that is true. That's what the overall formula works out to, basically. If it's not true, then the overall formula works out to false. And so that's what you want to do when you're writing these formatting rules, is you want to come out with either true or false at the end of the formula. Actually, the custom kind of the custom data validation works the same way. That's pretty much it. Next week, we'll talk about tables, pivot tables, and pivot charts, which are just really, really cool. So I definitely hope you can join me for that. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Sorry we ran a little long this afternoon. Any questions before we wrap it up? All right, excellent. Well, y'all have a great rest of the day, and I will see you next week. Bye now. Oh.